Nash pulled his Jeep up in front of the cabin in Warspur, Virginia, a bit a ways from the Appalachian Trail, and took in the picturesque view of it against the lake beyond. It was bigger than he'd expected, with lots of room, and he found his previous apprehension at spending the weekend there dissipating. He smiled broadly at his friend Kevin, who was sitting in the passenger seat and grinning like an idiot. "And what'd I tell you?" Kevin cajoled, his smile growing. "You're right, it's perfect." Nash droned reluctantly, trying not to sound too chagrined. "I'm not going on any fucking nature walks, though." He shot his friend a meaningful look, and Kevin's response was to grab at his own stomach, which was much bigger than Nash's, and raise an eyebrow. "You think I want to go for a walk?" Kevin replied almost condescendingly, and opened the passenger door to the Jeep. "Besides, we ain't here to walk." He then got out of the vehicle and immediately moved off to the tailgate to open it. Nash mirrored his movements and helped him with the gate. Within his Jeep sat 3 cases. One was Kevin's, 2 were his own, and all were filled with firearms of different makes and models. Nearby sat a big cardboard box filled with smaller boxes of ammunition, also of various calibers. "This is going to be fun," Nash admitted with a little more glee than he had expected. "Oh, this is going to be a lot of fun," Kevin echoed enthusiastically, almost at the same time. They spent the next half hour or so exploring the cabin grounds, the cabin itself, and unloading all of their gear. While the structure was sturdy and rustic, being made of red cedar logs, the inside was very modern and comfortable. It was also plumbed and had a working bathroom, which was Nash's biggest worry about making this trip at all. He and Kevin both hated dealing with anything to do with not having a modern toilet, and he'd had visions of outhouses the whole drive up. The cabin also had 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and even a deck. The property itself belonged to Jake, a mutual friend of theirs who had just a little money and had inherited the cabin and the land it was on the year before. He'd offered the place to Nash. When Kevin had explained how much trouble they were having finding somewhere nearby to shoot, that didn't cost a fortune. After getting everything inside and getting the lay of the land, Kevin, as he was wanting to do, made a pot of coffee. Jake and he were both enthusiasts, so there was a bit of an assortment of grounds. Nash and he had a cup and went out to the deck to take in the view. The shoreline spanned at least a mile northeast and southwest away from the cabin, but the opposite shore was only a couple of 100 yards away. It was early autumn and quite chilly, especially near the lake. The air was crisp, but not really cold. The water was so still that it looked like a mirror reflecting the trees on the other side, and the tapestry of yellows, oranges, greens, and even a few red leaves that had yet to give in to the coming winter was spectacular. In the distance, a mountain loomed over the entire scene, a silent sentinel observing their recreation. "That looks like Bob Ross," Kevin half joked with a chuckle after his 3rd or 4th sip of coffee. "Yeah, it is really beautiful," Nash agreed wistfully, looking out over the water and doing his best to just enjoy the moment. As he gazed out over the water, he thought he saw someone moving on the other side, and wondered if there were other cabins over there. Jake hadn't mentioned anything about neighbors, but he'd also only come up here a few times. The moment was lost as Nash gritted his teeth, hoping that the racket they were about to make didn't piss anyone off. He just didn't want to deal with it. The whole point of coming up here was to blow off steam and try to decompress. The last thing he was interested in was an argument with a stranger. Now something huge suddenly flew over the cabin and startled them both, but they couldn't see where it had gone. Kevin wondered if it was an eagle, but Nash figured it was just a turkey vulture, since they were everywhere in Virginia. Either way, it just added to the experience. They both finished their coffee, went back inside to grab the guns and ammo. They then headed out to the other side of the cabin, where Jake had kind of a target range set up. Jake's uncle had built it, and it wasn't anything fancy at all, but it served its purpose just fine. There was a big painted target at the base of a tree-covered hill opposite the lake, so they didn't need to worry about penetration. There was also a sturdy table, a couple of stools, and this neat little doohickey that you rolled through the grass to pick up shell casings. Kevin set the gun cases onto the table while Nash did the same with the ammunition. There were 4 types, but they were probably only going to shoot 2, or 3 today, since it was getting late, and they both agreed they weren't shooting past sunset. Kevin pulled his Taurus Judge out of a nylon zipper case and set it on the table, while Nash, very excitedly, opened his own case to reveal his brand new Canik MC9. His wife had just bought it for him as a gift, and he was really looking forward to finally shooting it. "Well, you're the birthday boy," Kevin insisted with a big smile. "Have at it." He handed over some ear protection, having already put his own in, and Nash took the muffs and put them on. The first round was way smoother than he had expected, and he was far more accurate than he'd ever thought he'd be. It had been a long time since he fired anything, and he figured he'd gotten rusty. The duo spent the next hour or so putting rounds through both pistols, and had a lot of fun doing so. Nash ran through an entire 2 boxes of 9mm, and the only reason he didn't reach for the third was that he wanted something to shoot the next day. Kevin's gun took longer to reload, and he was far less accurate, so he didn't use as much ammunition. Just as Jake fired the last shot in his magazine, he heard a loud, awful sound coming from behind him. The ear protection muffled it, but it was a horrible screech, and it made both men jerk in fright as they turned around. At first, Nash couldn't see anything, but then he spotted someone standing in the water across the lake, on the opposite shore. "What in the fuck was that?" Kevin asked in a frightened, angry tone as he took off his ear protection. "There's someone over there," Nash explained as he pointed out over the lake to what looked to him like an older white-haired woman standing there. "Did, Jake say anything about anyone else staying up here?" "I'm not sure, but if she's a hollerin', we better stop," Kevin pointed out diplomatically as he offered the woman across the way a wave. "Sorry, y'all." His yell echoed out over the lake, but Nash wasn't sure the woman had heard him, and she didn't react at all. That's when he noticed a wisp of smoke coming off of a fire he couldn't see on the other shore. "I think she's just camping," Nash suggested, a little relieved. People camping was one thing. They would probably not complain, but he didn't want to piss off any permanent neighbors. They tried to respect that she was out there, but he worried less about bothering someone who was potentially just not even going to be there the next day. "Yeah, well, I think you're right," Kevin agreed, waving at the woman again. "Let's get all this packed up. You hungry?" "Christ, yeah," Nash exclaimed, suddenly realizing that he was starving. "Liz made us a couple of sub sandwiches for tonight," Kevin told him nervously as he unloaded and packed away his own weapon. "There's also some frozen pizza and snacks. We could grab something hot at the gas station down the road for supper tomorrow if you want. And Jake said the chicken's really good." They collected their things and made a quick and slightly embarrassed exit back to the cabin. Nash put the guns away in their bedrooms, while Kevin got the food laid out and set the table. He downed some water, but made himself another coffee as well, while Nash reached for a soda from the cooler that they had in the Jeep for the drive. They sat down at the kitchen table to eat a delicious but cold meal. "Holy shit," Nash declared as he took a bite of the delicious sandwich. "That is really good." "Yes, like I said, Liz makes the most delicious sandwiches I'd ever tasted," Kevin extolled with a mouthful. "One of the many reasons I put a ring on it." The friends spent most of the evening enjoying the food and each other's company. There were no TV or internet in the cabin, but their phones worked and Nash had unlimited data. So they listened to music, watched a couple of videos, and chatted about the Dungeons and Dragons game Kevin ran for Nash, Jake, and some other friends. Eventually, at Kevin's behest, they took their drinks and snacks back out onto the deck to take in the night air as well, though they kept the music volume much lower so as not to be a nuisance. After quite a while, they both started to get a little tired, and when Nash looked, it was well past midnight. Kevin opted to turn in for the night, and Nash said that he'd turn in soon, but that he wanted to hang out a bit. His friend nodded knowingly and patted him on the shoulder as he said goodnight. They both knew Nash was going to smoke, and they both knew Kevin wasn't a fan at all. But it was Jake's cabin, and he did partake, so it wasn't like Jake would mind. They discussed it on the way up, and Kevin agreed that as long as Nash wasn't mixing it with the purpose of their visit or making it his problem, he wouldn't bitch about it. Nash lit up and took a long drag, letting the herb and the calm just wash over him. He probably could have just used the vape in his bedroom, but he didn't want to bother Kevin. More importantly, relaxing on the porch with a smoke was one of life's simple pleasures, and he really wanted to enjoy it. The half-moon full and the bright stars created an absolutely beautiful effect on the reflective ripples of the lake below. He took another drag and just watched the show for a while. Just as Nash was starting to nod off, he noticed something blotting out some of the reflective lights on the lake, close to the shore near the cabin. He shook his head a bit, thinking he was just seeing shadows. But when he looked again, there was definitely something moving across the surface of the water. He leaned forward, unnerved but very curious as to who would be out on the lake at this time of night. Or what? Nash couldn't quite see the object, so he leaned even further forward over the rail, half standing up from his chair as he did. Almost immediately, he wished that he hadn't, that he'd not even stayed outside, as a stray beam of moonlight illuminated the pale, gaunt face of an old woman sitting in a boat. It was the same woman who yelled at them earlier, the same woman he'd seen standing in the lake, and she was staring at the cabin. "Holy shit," Nash whispered to himself as he practically collapsed back into his chair. He flicked his joint over to the lake and rolled out of his chair to sneak back into the cabin. Once he was inside, he locked the sliding door, but looked up when he detected movement again. The old woman rowed her boat to the shoreline and got out of it, but didn't make a sound in the water at all. Nash found this both creepy as hell and deeply suspicious, but kept watching her. She gently padded out of the water and walked up, as though to go straight to the front door, like she knew where it was. Nash ran for his bedroom to grab his handgun and load it, but silently cursed himself as he hadn't reloaded a clip when he'd put it away. He instead quickly reached for the shotgun he'd brought and quickly loaded it with 3 12-gauge slugs. As he came out into the main room, he froze. An eerie silhouette loomed at the window of the front door. "You're being too loud." The old woman outside the door croaked hoarsely as she tapped on the window. "You need to be quiet up here." Nash rocked his head incredulously at the woman and leaned back into the darker part of the cabin. He had no idea whether she was armed, but didn't want to give her any kind of target whatsoever. What the hell was she doing? Was she senile, crazy, or just a meth head? Or all three? "You hear me?" The old woman cackled again with a little creepy chuckle. "You have to be quiet." Finally, shaking off the initial surprise of the whole bizarre situation, Nash finally came to his senses and groped for his phone to call the police. When he finally got it out of his pocket and found it dead, he cursed at himself silently. He just had to show Kevin that one last video, didn't he? "Shit," Nash quivered as he put the phone away and raised his shotgun up to aim it at the door. When he looked in that direction, though, the woman's shadow was gone. He looked at all the other windows and saw nothing, then went back to the sliding door to the deck, but couldn't see anything outside of it. He turned and moved back up the hall and almost ran right into Kevin, who had just come out of his room. "What in the fuck?" Kevin exclaimed loudly as he jerked the hand holding his judge downward in recognition. "Nash? Well, Jesus, what in the fuck is going on? Someone outside?" In his other hand, he held, of all things, a blackened steel Roman gladius. Nash wasn't exactly shocked, as Kevin had a collection of swords, but he wasn't aware that he'd brought one with him. "You need to be quiet, I said," came the old woman's hoarse voice from the other side of the door behind Nash. He jumped in total panic and almost turned and fired, and would have had Kevin not grabbed his shoulder and started speaking. "Lady, what in the fuck?" Kevin exclaimed angrily at the sliding door to the deck as he walked closer to it. "It's like 2 o'clock in the morning. What do you do knocking on our door?" He flipped the switch and turned on a light over the deck, which suddenly and brightly illuminated the woman. She looked oddly normal for someone who was acting so insane, and Nash thought that she might actually be senile and just lost and confused. But the thought didn't last long. Well, they don't come out at night," the old woman explained in utter confusion as she leaned away from the door. "Only when the sun's out. They're asleep, same as most folks, I expect." She paused, then her expression became serious. "Still though, you got to be quiet up here. You can't be loud. You just can't." "Wait, now what are you talking about?" Kevin asked pointedly as he cocked his head to the side. "Who don't come out at night?" His last question came out in a comical squeak, which almost made Nash laugh. "Well, don't worry about that," the unhinged old woman insisted, gesturing with her hands as though to shoo him. "You just need to worry about being quiet, at least till tomorrow. Then you both can get on out of here in the morning." Without another word, the woman turned awkwardly and stepped off the deck to the ground and disappeared into the darkness. Nash got closer to the door, and with the deck light on, he was just barely able to see the woman back out to her boat and get in it. He looked to Kevin, who eyed him in askance, but Nash had nothing for this and just shrugged at the whole situation. When he turned back to look at the woman, she was already paddling back across the lake in her little rowboat. What in the fuck was that? Nash asked no one in particular in an only slightly comical tone. The chuckle that accompanied his words was, likewise, only half filled with mirth. "Well, I have no idea, but I tell you what, I'm fucking awake now." Nash and Kevin stayed up for another hour at least, unable to sleep and feeling totally unnerved by the entire situation. They talked it over at least a half a dozen times and reasoned that she had to be senile and confused. But there wasn't a whole lot to do about it right then. They resolved to cut their trip short and head home the next day, but to contact law enforcement to let them know that she was out there. It was all they could do, really. After finally talking for a long enough time that they both actually got tired again, they decided to try and get some sleep. Nash, despite getting sleepy, was both completely freaked out, but also really pissed off at it all. They came up here to relax, and he was doing exactly that in spades, and then this crazy woman came out from nowhere. He felt robbed, and he didn't feel guilty that he wasn't sure he gave a shit about the old senile bat at all. He also still felt vulnerable, so he kept that loaded shotgun close to his bed. The next morning, Kevin was up first and making coffee. He had already packed up most of the food and some other things they'd brought with him and loaded it into the Jeep, but left out something to eat, as well as the guns and ammo. After a couple of toaster pastries and some coffee, Kevin got up to load the rest, but Nash stopped him with an upraised hand. "Hold on," Nash insisted in frustration as he got to his feet. "I get that we've got to report this and all, and I'm all aboard for getting out of here, but I just feel like we got kind of cheated, and I want to get as much out of what's left as we can. Let's go empty that shotgun at least, and maybe squeeze off a few more rounds, and then we could head out." "Yeah, I was feeling kind of bad about it and wondered if you want to do that as well," Kevin affirmed in relief as he picked up a box of ammunition. "Let's go have a little more fun before we go. If she says anything else, well, we'll just leave." Together, the friends loaded everything else into Nash's Jeep, then headed back down to the range. They took turns firing the shotgun, which Nash had a lot of fun with, and then they each loaded and emptied their respective pistols. Nash wasn't sure his aim was as good today as it had been the day before, but he wasn't sure that he cared. He was as glad that he had got to have a little more fun. As Kevin was zipping his revolver back up into its case, Nash cleared the shotgun to make sure it was empty. And that's when they heard it, that horrible screech from the day before. But now, with their ear protection off, it was so much louder. It also clearly hadn't come from across the lake, but from the sky above. And when Nash looked up, he could not believe what he saw. A grayish-green, scaly humanoid figure with huge bat-like wings and glowing red eyes loomed over the pair of friends. A black shadow in an otherwise blue sky. Kevin shouted a warning, but it was too late. The creature had dive-bombed the duo, and the next thing Nash knew, he was being gripped roughly about the neck and ribs by horribly sharp talons, which dug into him. Before he even understood what had happened, he was well over 100 feet in the air, being carried off over the lake towards the mountain in the distance. Nash looked up at the creature which had him so firmly in its grasp and saw a horrible reptile-like face with a forked tongue and razor-sharp teeth. Below, he heard Kevin shouting and heard the sound of gunfire, followed by another screech, and then silence. Whether his friend was dead or not, Nash could not tell. He tried to cry out, tried to say anything, but whenever he made even the slightest sound, the thing that had him tightened his grip, cutting deeper into his flesh. As the creature flew over the other side of the lake, Nash saw the old woman on the shore, standing hip-deep in the water again. No longer as sinister in the light of day, the woman seemed crestfallen as she looked back up at him. Her head shook sadly, and she wore a look of pity on her face. "I told you," the old woman crowed before diving into the safety of the water. "You can't be loud up here."